All right. So good afternoon. My name is Zahid Alkal. In this section here, we're going to talk about the measuring the true cost of the solution and what's really valuable to you from an end user perspective there, or from an administrator perspective, right? So for CommVault, the preferred method of when we are doing data protection. So one thing is CommVault always does their licensing based on what we call front-end terabytes. It's the amount of data that we are going to back up. When I do a full backup of anything, how much data am I going to read from there? That's how we license it, right? So for a virtual server protection over there, we have a front-end terabyte model, which basically says, with this over here, you buy whatever capacity, front-end capacity, that will allow you to back up any number of VMs, any number of Hyper VMs or VMware VMs, applications that are running inside those VMs, any number of file servers, Windows, Linux, or whatever, NAS targets. That includes deduplication, that includes tape out, that also includes cloud connectors and web console. So pretty much, if you are a virtualized, super virtualized environment, everything you need to do efficient end-to-end protection, including efficient storage, is built in this. But you're not limited to that. You also have the ability to add on all of these things. So if you wanted to have your gold VMs protected a little bit differently, you can add IntelliSnap options to that. So it's all based on front-end terabyte. It's not the size of the VM, it's the amount of space used inside the VMDK. So it's only the amount of data that we read, and if the VM is 100 gigs but only 30 gigs is used, we only read 30 gigs.
Doesn't that incentivize me to back up less and use less of your product? If I've got to pay per drink, essentially.
Well, the flip side of that is...
You have to pay per drink and still you drink a bit.
I'll drink less.
Well, here's the thing, if you're that's where, you know, you're doing backup for a reason, right? If you choose to not do backups, then there's different repercussions to that. So
I wouldn't be choosing to do different backups, I'd be choosing to do backups differently, you know, with something else.
But it's not, so that's where I'm going back to. It's not that you're going to pay any less when you back it up differently. It's just a different method.
It's not about agents for different applications and that kind of thing, as it was in the past, and there aren't a million stock codes for those different agents.
Right. Basically, the thing, I know where you're getting at this over here. Let me not license you based on how much I have. It's based on what my infrastructure looks like. My whole thing there is, and we kind of ran it different ways, you end up paying the same thing, or sometimes less, because I would argue that the other way also encourages bad behavior, like overcrowding and overdensity and so on and so forth. I'll come to that in a second over there. But so if I keep this in mind, front-end terabyte, it's only the use space. To your point over there, it's prevalent in this space at least to basically be able to do socket-based licensing. The first argument there is, how do you know how many sockets you need? You don't just go pick up and buy 100 sockets. You've already done some sizing and everything else before, and you said, yep, I'm going to run so many VMs. I have so much data storage behind those VMs over there. So I have a decent size, an idea of the decent size of the environment over there. Now, the example configuration over here, tell me if I'm way off the mark over there, but what we found out in our in looking at usage patterns in our customer base, typically it's most environments you have 10 VMs per socket, assuming it's a 6-core socket. You have around 50 gigs of VMs on an average, not for all VMs, but on average allocated and used, not provisioned. And you know, that's basically what we've seen, the most common metric over there. Some environments may vary a little bit differently, and so on and so forth. Let's say an example of 200 VMs over there, and I need to manage an environment of 200 VMs. I'm probably looking at 10 VMs a socket. I need about 20 sockets to run that VM, run that infrastructure. From a capacity perspective, I assume this over here, which is what we've seen by far. That translates to about 10 terabytes. I've bumped it up to 11 terabytes over there. If I look at socket-based software, which is I'm going to charge you based on this over here, basically looks like this over, right? 20 sockets at whatever. Comes out to this. And when I look at my front-end terabyte pricing, I look at, wow, CommVault is almost 100% more than my software-based licensing. Sounds about right? Have we accounted for everything here though?
Do you buy back other people's software? Because I could really use this. Give me a discount?
5%?
Yeah.
Give me a second.
No, the true question is, does it offer $25,000 worth of value? That's the difference.
It does when you can't restore a file.
What are you, what are you forgetting?
But
What
you
do
can
I need to
restore
run my
files.
infrastructure? I'm going to create backup copies. I need to have backup servers, and I need to land all of that data somewhere. So I'm not just backing up in space. I have to actually have a disk target somewhere to be able to land the data. And nowadays, if you're not doing deduplication to disk, especially for larger environments, you're using out on a lot of the capabilities out there, a lot of storage efficiency and everything else.
What was the question? Is to provide $25,000 worth of value?
Versus, yeah, you're incumbent
more.
provider. You're incumbent provider.
And I'm sorry I have to step off from it, but the socket base, is this the competitor, and that's Simpana?
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking if it's a $25,000 worth of additional value?
Yeah, and the Simpana model is you pay per terabyte backed up. And I asked earlier, like, that would make me want to consume less of their product. But I'm interrupting you, so please.
No worries. So no worries. But the thing is, when you look at backup infrastructure, it's not just about the backup software. You also have to have additional infrastructure surrounding it, and you have to actually size that in, factor that in when you put the total cost of solution.
But the other thing is the 11 terabyte, the Simpana licensing is all in. That's basically all the features, right? You're not.
It's all these features.
Right. So, and that includes dash copy and all that good stuff.
Correct.
So, I mean, you're not having to think about things like with the other software, you're having to worry about things like potentially WAN replication speeds and all that other good stuff. And here you're getting basically, and does it include all the application-specific add-ins like Exchange, SQL?
That's all. Yeah, you can back up applications with this.
So basically, yeah, you can do that with VSS, but these guys have basically specific application add-ins that go beyond what just VSS can do. So I have always thought about backup as an insurance policy. You know, basically look at what it does, and if it's too much, find something else. But you know, look at the full spectrum of capabilities, not just simple backup and recovery.
I know. And my question is it worth twice as much?
So that's actually that's where it all boils down to, right? Is it worth twice as much? But my question is it really twice as much? Because when you look at the infrastructure, you're not just looking at the software. You have to have an infrastructure to run the software. If the software doesn't run in isolation, you have to buy enough storage, enough servers for it to run effectively. And so when you look at the total cost, look at this too. If I'm going to create just one backup copies, I need to buy a couple of servers, master server and repositories are in the backend. Whatever price point you throw in there, that's that. And then more importantly, you need to buy dedupe storage too, because nowadays if you're doing backup to disk, if you're not doing dedupe, if you're doing dedupe, then you only need about 15 terabytes. If you're not doing dedupe, you need 50 to 60 terabytes. It washes out, right? So add this over here. That's an extra. There's an external dedupe appliance. This is the street price. This is not even the list price that you get nowadays for dedupe appliances of these sizes over here, right? With Simpana, deduplication is built in. What you need is, yes, you need a new server, and actually my server is, I can admit it right now, it's a lot more expensive because I need to have, for it to run deduplication, it needs to have solid state drives and so on and so forth. But I need only one because that one can do a lot more workload. Secondly, you don't need to buy disk, deduplication target disk, because deduplication is built in, source deduplication built in. So I only need to buy raw storage capacity, SATA-based storage capacity, right, which goes at whatever price point over there.
But you're assuming that whatever the socket-based software is does not already deduplication as
Yes,
well.
Or that Windows 2012 doesn't have deduplication built
So,
into the operating system.
yes, thank you. I was wondering if somebody would bring that up. Windows 2012 R2,
On the
one thing.
deduplication appliance.
Right. So, number one, deduplication. Look at Windows deduplication 2012, documentation on 2012. First thing it says under caveats, files cannot be more than 1 terabyte. As soon as a file exceeds more than 1 terabyte, the deduplication process slows down like crazy. Second thing, it's post-process. The file has to be unmodified for an X number of days before Windows goes in and processes for deduplication. So post-process means it needs to first land the full file, and then Windows goes in after the fact and tries to shrink it down, provided that file is less than 1 terabyte. Right? So you still need to provide the landing space for it to land there for Windows to process. So it's not that my eventual footprint is this much, but I still need to provide this. Right? Thirdly, the modified time over there, if I'm doing things like reverse incremental and whatnot, the file is modified every day. So there is no, this file is untouched for X number of days. Lastly, Windows can only process 2 terabyte an hour per day. So
the 11 terabytes, that's
so the rule of
including the deduplication, right?
Right. So the rule of thumb is for every terabyte of front end, and this is across the board, regardless of what data type and everything else, for most daily change rates, for every terabyte of front end, so every terabyte you back up, you need 1.5 terabytes in the back end over a 30-day retention period.
Okay, thanks.
That's generally how most deduplications wash out to. So if I have 10 terabytes in the front end, I will need 15 terabytes of dedupe storage in the back end.
Okay, so the 11 terabytes is probably going to be 15 then, or?
Yeah, 15 or 16 in the back end.
So your licensing is for 11?
Yes.
Why?
We always start license based on front end, not how much I store, how much I read in the full backup. It's always license it based on the size of the VM, the use size.
If my front end is also deduplicated?
It's what I read. It's what I read. So when
I zip up all my files before you back them up.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Could I zip up all my big files before you back them up?
Yeah, and I'll just read the zip files. But then you pay for that, because as soon as you zip it up, you're doing things like compression on the zip file. Compressed files don't dedupe very well, so you end up paying the penalty for that in the back end anyways. So that's all the work you're doing in the front.
Is there like a limit? Is there like a hard limit
to how much you can back up? No.
So if I have 11 terabyte license and my environment grows, it keeps
you just
working,
add additional terabytes on top of that.
Yeah, but it keeps working, software?
Yes.
Or it stops working at
No.
11 terabytes?
No, so if we give you enough warnings, 3-month warning, so it doesn't abruptly stop, 80% threshold, 100% threshold, 110% threshold, at 110% nag buttons, reset, reset, reset.
And then it stops?
And then it doesn't back up anymore, net new.
Exactly.
The existing ones continue to back up. And then you can always go back and say, as soon as you say don't back up this particular VM, that washes off my count over there automatically.
Okay.
Unless I'm misunderstanding, I mean, I can see where this is true if you were building brand new infrastructure, but in an existing infrastructure, to me it would almost be a tough sell, because the server and the storage you might already have, or I mean, in many cases they could just be taken out of the equation.
So server is the easy part, right?
Yeah.
Storage piece, if I'm not doing dedupe, you probably have storage. First of all, storage has, whatever, hardware has limited life cycle anyways. So typically when you're doing this, it's usually not unless it's a very focused, one small thing over here in the back, thing that you're trying to protect, usually it's part of a larger project, which includes servers refresh and storage refresh, and typically there is a reason you're looking to replace your existing backup vendor. And
I guess if I were the buyer, I'd say you want twice as much for your software, match the other competitor's price. I'm not going to take all this other fuzzy soft costs into the equation.
And the business doesn't care about the self-help portal. I'm
I get that.
I'm trying to get to the businesses.
Business does
providing
care.
them a service, a backup guarantee, and they don't really care about the value adds that you offer, such that they would pay twice as much maybe.
No, and business doesn't care about whether you buy it by sockets or FAT8 either. They look at the bottom line, and they're not looking at line items. They're looking at my total cost. And when I look at my total cost, you're basically adding up all of these things over there.
They tell me you need to be able to restore this critical class 1 workload within 4 hours. And they give me a budget, and I have to solve for that.
Right.
So.
But so that's the thing. When you look at So backup infrastructure or backup software, you never look at it in isolation, because that's where you go back and say, that's what leads to bad design, bad implementations in the first place. We've had countless replacements of opportunities where we go back and say, really, all you had to do was do this over here. It got nothing to do with the software. All you had to do this with this, and you would have been fine. Guess what? You weren't told by that, so that's fine. It's our benefit.
What kind of value are you hearing from your customers about things like the self-help portal?
Huge, especially if you go into those mid to mid enterprise type spaces over there. People are basically just too tired of being on the other end of the phone, trying to do all of these things over here when they have a huge thing to do, when they have all of these other things to do on the business side there. Right? So web console is a huge thing, but I'm not necessarily saying that web console is this over here. My point is this: I can still, and kind of going a little bit off topic, but I still have another option of saying, if you don't want dedupe, I can give you that too. Which I haven't brought it up here, which brings me right in parity. But I intentionally didn't do that because backup software or data management software doesn't run in isolation. You either have an existing infrastructure on which you have already purchased it, paying maintenance and whatnot on that, or you have to also acquire storage and servers to run that infrastructure, especially if it's a sizable one.
So if you want to do a direct comparison, what it sounds like is basically you'd have to really rethink not just backup and recovery, but some other operations to try to get to the ROI figure you're thinking about. Like maybe dash copy adds some value. Maybe the self-service portal adds some value. Maybe there's some value to be had from I just lost it. One of the other
maybe you
features
sell
you talked about.
the portal first and the backup solution second.
But that's my point. It's not even feature functionality. I'm not even comparing feature functionality at this point. That is all value. And I'm looking at, let's say you just want to do basic VM protection.
Yep.
That includes efficient storage utilization in the backend, which is effectively dedupe. Leave aside all the functionality. When you give those criteria, it needs to be doing global deduplication, it needs to be protecting all my VMs, and needs to be providing fast instant recovery. For all of these 200 VMs over there, you are going to need backup software, yes, but you're also going to need servers that are capable of supporting those workloads, and also you're going to need dedupe storage. Period. You can't get away with that. And my point is, look at the total cost of the solution for this. The only thing is, where's the thing? So my value here is not this as a backup software. My value here is the total data management, where I have eliminated the need for having this very expensive storage device in the back end over here that will tie you to that thing over there.
Yeah, but you are comparing features and functionality at this point because you're assuming that the socket-based software can't do dedupe.
And yes, and that's my point. At this level, they can. Which is the reason why there are so many deduplication target devices being sold behind VM protection only software.
But you assume that they will need 10 servers for 200 VMs?
No, 2 servers.
2 servers.
I mean, at least in the solution one, I'm not paying per terabyte. So what do I care about dedupe?
Sorry?
The sockets you need.
Why do I care if my backup server has extra storage because I can't dedupe it?
Because in that case, you're not requiring 15 terabytes, you require 60 terabytes.
60?
60.
Because if you're a 4-to-1 dedupe ratio.
Yeah, if I'm not doing dedupe.
Dedupe ratio is that extreme. 15
Sorry?
to 60
per socket.
Yeah, because if I'm not doing dedupe and if I have 4 weeks worth of data to keep,
10 hosts.
I'm basically keeping 4 full backups.
100 VMs.
That's 60 terabytes.
Sounds like a whiteboard I would need to see, but we can do that later.
Yeah, and basically that's the whole idea. When you're doing deduplication over 30-day retention, 1.5 times, worst case, on an average case, sometimes it's better. Sometimes you don't need 15 terabytes, you'll probably need equivalent, but that's kind of the general rule of thumb to size. But if you're not doing dedupe and if you have a 4-week retention, then you're basically retaining 4 full backups, and it's, maybe we got compression, but that's about it.
So I guess I'll be the devil's advocate among it all, and you guys win the award for bringing up pricing in a group of technologists. And this is probably the coolest issue that you're going to run into. And we chatted about this before the event. Your market and who you guys should be pitching to is not necessarily us, because we don't want to pay for things, right? As a backup product, this is how we see it. But don't you find that your value is more pitching to legal compliance, the BCP folks, not to discount, like we all cover that space as well, but we had a big chat about this, and it's an interesting, you guys cover a wide range of features and that's really where that business value comes in, but that's intangible, and that's what's hard for us to look at and say, I can buy product X and I can back up the whole gamut for 1/3, 1/4, 1/2 product, and that's capital expenditure, low OpEx that we've got to carry over,
and I can meet
tangible
my SLA.
cost, right? Yeah. So we do a lot of funky things with bits here and bits there, and we've got a lot of orchestration stuff that's already in place. So. I don't know what the question is. I don't even know what the that's almost the answer to without the question. But that's in my mind. I see you guys as you've got a wider pitch because your product in its feature set that you can do on the compliance sides. With the legal hold stuff, the compliance features, especially I'm in financial services. They love that stuff. They need that stuff. So there's a lot of other mix and match features that aren't really getting.
I think you raised a good point. You said mix and match, and from a leadership perspective, I hear mix and match, and all I hear is time sync. Okay, that's from CIOs don't want people to dick around, for lack of a better phrase. I guess it probably was a better phrase. Sorry, but really, at the end of the day, yeah, you don't want to waste money, but at the same time, the results are what matters. And I would rather have people more focused on true value add to the business that can exponentially improve the bottom line than I would be on nickel and diming to save a few bucks on a backup solution. And I realize everybody's in a different situation. I mean, I've been in environments where they say you have this much money, now go do all these stupid things with it. But at the same time, that's, there's got to be a point at which I think that the better phrase is value versus cost. And that's what it comes down to with one of the things I used to say was we're not out to minimize our costs, we're out to optimize them. And I think that's, I know that sounds just like stupid semantics, but I actually meant that. And when I would actually say that to my staff, and they would be like, what are you talking about? But I want to make sure we're spending our money in the right ways and that we're focusing on the business as much as possible. I mean, I told a group of people at a technical day once, I don't want to have to hire more administrators of things. I'd rather get solutions that are easier to use, that are more automated, more operationally efficient, and get more business analysts on staff.
And just to add to that, one thing I would say here too is you're not necessarily paying more. You're getting a lot more value, but you're not necessarily paying more. Is basically the gist of what we're trying to get. And this is with just one copy. When I make it into 2 copies, when I need to have copy 1 here and DR copy over here, guess what? I need to have a like-for-like dedupe device on the other side too. And if I do that same math over there, I'm basically increasing the cost here. For me, the extra cost is just the cost of the bare metal. Because the software already includes deduplication, WAN replication, dash copies, incremental forevers, and everything else there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the chart that we haven't looked at. Is not just like we're looking at 1 copy, bang, that's your huge hit. We have to eat a huge cost to get that 1 copy. You get 11 copies, you sandbox stuff, you push to multiple destinations, then all of a sudden that starts to come down. Right. It's where's the sweet spot that you guys find in your target market? Like obviously, we've got SMB, high M, and enterprise, and SP, big enterprise guys that want nothing to do with something like this because they've home rolled their own bizarro Facebook style system. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's across the board. To tell you the truth, it's those high ends. A lot of the MSPs are basically the ones that are most interested in this because not the feature functionality, it's there, and the deduplication optimization, it's the operation ability. It's the ability to write API, write their own custom code around the APIs and everything else. That's a huge one for us. On the mid enterprise too. So I would say everything from the mid up is basically SP. That's where we've been very, very successful. It's when you come to that gray area between small, really small to that mid, that's where this actually becomes relevant. To tell you the truth, when I do this in the mid and above, it's a no-brainer because they are actually doing infrastructure projects. They're not doing backup projects. Right. So right now the sweet spot for us is this, but what we're looking to see is there's no reason why SMBs, the S side of the SMBs, cannot benefit from the same thing.
And Scott brought up a great point, and I think we do a lot of monkeying around to kind of make this stuff work, and we have a blind acceptance to a lot of that practice, and that's where those incumbents win. You know, we already have a product that does a good hunk of this, and that's why it's tough to come in and say, just stop doing that, buy this new thing, costs more, but you're going to do it differently, and it's going to become better in 2 months.
They would get, you know, they would probably have a lot more success if they would just pitch it as a, like, I think you're going down this track, because when I looked up Simpana to know what it was like, oh, data management. Okay, so it's not backup. It's not just backup anyway. And, you know, that's what would get me interested is you come in and you say, hey, do you want a self-service portal that, by the way, does backup of your VMs in a really incredible and interesting way that's survivable. Also, it does some compression and helps you on your WAN links. That's a much more compelling story than, you know, you pay per terabyte.
Yeah, no, absolutely, get it. This is, our value prop is never pricing. This is just an illustration of you get all of these at the same price point. Spot on though. Too often we've got too much into the single pane of glass type thing, which is a huge value prop for us, incredibly successful in the mid and upper thing over there. But it's when you get to the ones where we look at targeted point solutions where that messaging needs to change a little bit. All right.
So we just have to note we proudly made it all the way through all these presentations at Tech Field Day, and that was the first instance of single pane of glass. So ding!
I didn't want to use that, but anyway. So to summarize, you know, we talked about all the enterprise class capabilities that are available to you even in the smaller and the mid workloads over there, spanning across VM platforms. That's the key over here. It's not just one platform. We talked about the whole value and low cost. It's not just the lowest cost, it's the optimal cost. And what value do you get out of that without actually going, you know, way beyond what your budget or what your capabilities are. And then obviously eliminate the complexity of day-to-day operations, access, restore, and so on and so forth over there.